Sixers contributor Kevin McCormick is here as we've got the NBA draft tonight. We'll get a couple thoughts on that. And obviously, Kevin, the big news that everybody is keeping an eye on is all of these reports coming from all over the place regarding Ben Simmons. So let's kind of try to comb through them and make some sense of them. Obviously, Woj yesterday that the Sixers are looking at deals. The Simmons team seems to be okay with that. It seems that they have come to terms with, we're okay with being traded. So with that, do you think that Daryl Morey will make a move tonight for Ben Simmons?
My gut has to say no, just because we've seen the whole time Daryl Morey has remained firm on the asking price. He wants an all-star caliber player in return for Ben Simmons. He is not looking for picks. He's not looking for future assets. He understands that the Sixers window is now, and if he's going to move on from Ben Simmons, it has to be for somebody that moves the needle. And I think when you see these growing reports in Washington and in Portland with Damian Lillard and Bradley Beal, that you're going to kind of sit on your hands with a trade chip like Ben Simmons. So while I do feel Daryl Morey will be active tonight, we've already seen him make one move. I don't see the Ben Simmons trade happening tonight.
Right. I think it's been weird, though, because some people, there was a tweet out there earlier that suggested, hey, they want to move him tonight. That would suggest, hey, just give me the best offer tonight, and you got this guy. You're not buying that.
No, not really. Just because I feel like Daryl Morey's likely gotten some enticing offers from now. And I know the Jason Dumas report that you were just referencing, it did talk about the Sixers wanting to move Ben Simmons tonight, but the more interesting thing that I thought from that report was he kind of mentioned that the relationship between both sides was over, and now it feels like while in the beginning when we were hearing reports that Rich Paul was going to the NBA Draft Combine to talk with Daryl Morey and Elton Brand, it kind of felt like both sides were working together. Well, now it feels like the two sides are split, and that maybe Ben Simmons no longer wants to return to Philadelphia, while maybe in the beginning that offer still might have been on the table.
So obviously the Ben Simmons trade talks will be probably a big part of tonight's broadcast. I would imagine that they're going to address that he is the biggest guy. Outside of Dame Lillard, Bradley Beal, is there any other move you would make that would include Ben Simmons in that trade?
Tonight, I really don't know, just because a lot of the teams that have been referenced to be in the mix don't really have that enticing of an offer. I feel like if we see a Ben Simmons trade, it's going to be a multi-team deal. There's going to be a lot of moving parts, different pieces going around everywhere. So I think it's tough to kind of narrow down one specific team with one specific deal, just because the way the NBA's, going about these superstar trades, that there's a lot of different teams coming in and out. Look at the James Harden situation. It necessarily came down to the Sixers in Brooklyn pretty much for a majority of the talks, and so many different teams were able to interweave and pick up some pieces here and there, whether it was Cleveland, Indiana to move some things as well. So it's tricky to say. I know The Athletic reported that Washington, Toronto, and Miami are kind of the likely destinations right now, and even then, there's no real deal out there with those three teams outside of a Bradley Beal trade that kind of makes sense for Daryl Morey to do tonight at least.
Yeah, let's look at those a little bit. The whole Toronto stuff. Give me a read on that with Toronto. And, there was a report that the Sixers actually made them an offer that they turned down. Don't know how you feel about that, but it was a pretty big haul. Kyle Lowry sign and trade, Van Vliet, Anunoby, plus the number 4 pick in the draft tonight. Good enough?
For me, yeah, I think that deal is very enticing. Would Toronto do that deal? No, I don't think so. And I feel like that's why the Ben Simmons saga is nowhere near being done. We've seen all of these absurd offers that Daryl Morey is calling to teams and throwing out there for Ben Simmons, and we've seen reports that the calls that Daryl Morey has received for Ben Simmons has been very underwhelming. So, just kind of reading the tea leaves and speculating on what's being talked about, it feels like both sides are still at both extreme ends, and we're nowhere near close to getting to that middle ground where, the talks are going to intensify and we really could see a deal getting done.
Kevin McCormick, 97.3 ESPN.com, Sixers contributor, Sports Illustrated, at Kevin MCC NBA on Twitter. All right, so Miami, tell me how that makes any sense.
Maybe if you were trying to discuss a potential Ben Simmons, Jimmy Butler swap, I feel like that's the only real, thing that could come from that. But I really don't see Miami wanting to do that when they have a guy like Bam Adebayo, to where he's kind of, like Ben Simmons in that mold of athletic defender, can defend multiple positions, but is kind of a secondary facilitator in the front court. And I feel like wherever Ben Simmons goes next, that is likely going to be his role. And Simmons and Adebayo have similar offensive handicaps, so I really don't see why they'd want to bring in a guy like Ben who would kind of hinder Bam Adebayo. But from the Sixers sense, listen, we know well that Joel Embiid was very tight with Jimmy Butler, and he was noticeably upset when he was traded away. And we also know that Joel Embiid can ink a Supermax extension this offseason. So if you're trying to entice him to keep him in Philadelphia for 5 more years once his current contract ends, I think bringing in a guy like Jimmy Butler who still complements the rest of the roster, still has what they need in terms of perimeter shot creation, can be a guy on the outside who can give a shot to you late at the end of games. He could still be an above-average defender, so while you'd still be losing defense and moving on from Simmons, you still have a two-way star to move in his place. But from what Miami would get in return, I don't see a Simmons-Butler swap really having any sense of reality.
Washington's the other team. The only trade that makes sense with Washington is for Bradley Beal, correct?
Correct. I don't see, any of their pieces being enticing other than that, and a Russell Westbrook Ben Simmons swap would not go well at all, at least in my eyes.
There was a lot of other teams: Indiana, Cleveland, Minnesota, Sacramento. Anything there?
Sacramento would be interesting if they'd be willing to put De'Aaron Fox on the table, but that's the thing with a lot of these teams. While, they might be necessarily ideal situations for a Ben Simmons, they don't really have anything to give in return. Minnesota, maybe you could talk about a Simmons-D'Angelo Russell swap, but they also mentioned that they don't want to move D'Angelo Russell. They want to add Ben Simmons to their core of Russell, Karl Anthony Towns, and Simmons Edwards. So I really don't see it. There's yet to be that team to where they have the pieces and both sides it makes sense for. So at this point, it really feels like it's going to be Damian Lillard, Bradley Beal, or bust.
That's the latest with Ben Simmons, which obviously could change here. A lot has happened. A lot of people have said a deal is imminent. I mean, do you think that it might not happen tonight, but that it will happen?
At this point, I will say that it feels like the Simmons talk has grown from if he's going to get traded to a when he's going to get traded. I sadly think that Game 7 against Atlanta will be his last game played in Philadelphia as a member of the Sixers. And while I wouldn't say it's imminent, I think it is going to happen before we hit into training camp for next season.
All right. So everybody just feels, look, it's time. It almost feels like he doesn't want, like his team is now saying, okay, we're cool with finding new plays. Do we feel it's at that point where it feels like, it's just time? Like the whole Carson Wentz thing. It's just time. Like, is that where we are with Ben Simmons?
I feel like it, just because when you look at past situations with athletes in general, I feel like it's hit the point with Ben Simmons to where the rap sheet is too long against him that it's almost at the point where he's not going to be able to flip his narrative where it all began. Similar to Markelle Fultz, all the things he went through here, athletes don't typically, flip their entire script in the place where things went down. The change of scenery is there, and the Sixers are in between a rock and a hard place now, because while I agree with a lot of the things that you were talking about before I came on about Ben Simmons still being a good young player, and he makes the players around him better, and he's still only approaching his prime seasons. But when you look at the other franchise cornerstone in Joel Embiid, he is playing like a top 5 guy right now. You don't know how many prime years you're going to have left of him. And with the way he showed last year, the way he dominated on the floor, he showed that he can be a top guy that can lead you, deep into the playoffs, potential for a finals run with the correct pieces around him. So if you're going to move on from Ben Simmons now, you have to get him that guy to win now, because if you're the Sixers, the window's open right now.
Kevin McCormick, 97.3 ESPN.com, our Sixers contributor. Sports Illustrated covers the Sixers nationally for them, at Kevin MCC NBA. All right, so Daryl Morey, draft night, his record of drafting. He hasn't taken a guy in the first round since Sam Decker a bunch of years ago. So at 28 tonight, does Daryl Morey make a pick?
I don't think so. And it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because Daryl Morey has this record of not really taking picks in the first round, but yet hit a home run last year on draft night between taking Tyrese Maxey, who was universally agreed upon as the steal of the draft, and hit very well in the second round as well. Paul Reed, Isaiah Joe, guys that show good promise. But I do have to say I don't think that the Sixers will pick there at 28. I think acquiring that second round pick, that it feels like Daryl's trying to buff up the treasure chest a little bit to try and maybe bring in a veteran that'll help the team more win now, as opposed to trying to strike gold again with another young prospect.
Right. So if they have 28, what is a realistic, option there? Do they get a rotational player with 28? Do they, get a guy who complements Joel Embiid? I doubt that happens. You're not trading pick 28 and getting a secondary scorer. But what in your mind are they looking for with 28?
In terms of if they're to make the selection themselves?
Yeah. No. If they're trading 28, what do they want in return for that pick? Like, obviously, they want to use that pick to get a veteran player here because they think that could help more than pick 28 can.
Absolutely. So it's more just trying to fill in the gaps. As we know, there's multiple free agents on the roster this season, and players will be available. I think one team to keep an eye on is the Cleveland Cavaliers. I believe it was Zach Harper of The Athletic reported that they're trying to move on from some of their long-term money, and they're willing to not only they're starters with Kevin Love, but they're also trying to move on from role players like a Larry Nance Jr., like a Jetty Osman. So that could be a potential switch for the Sixers. Larry Nance Jr. was tied to the Sixers leading up to the trade deadline. He still fits a role now. He could be that Mike Scott replacement, that added forward depth that Doc Rivers said the team has missed. When Tobias Harris came off the floor, I think he'd be a nice, suitable option. Still on a tradable contract, there's something to do there. So I think you could still be in the market for a backup point guard after how the George Hill experiment went down. There's a chance they lose Furkan Korkmaz in free agency. Could try and find a 3-and-D type guy, another secondary ball handler. So I feel like the optionality is there because the bench essentially might have to be resculpted totally with losing Korkmaz and Mike Scott. So there's going to be roles there to fill. So I wouldn't necessarily say there's a set type of player they should be looking for, but there should be veteran options out there to bolster that bench unit and fill out a necessary rotation.
All right. Our friend Keith Pompey, I guess, reported about an hour ago, 45 minutes ago, that the Sixers offered Golden State Ben Simmons for a trade centered on Andrew Wiggins, James Wiseman, and 4 first-round picks. They have 7 and 14, I believe, in this year's draft. So if
Correct.
that was the return, how do you feel?
Not great. If Andrew Wiggins is the kind of the headline piece.
You were winless for Wiggins at one point.
Yeah, that would be, that storyline in itself would be hilarious, and we'd also get the feel-good reunion of Andrew Wiggins and Joel Embiid from their Kansas days, the whole what if Embiid didn't get hurt before the tournament. But listen, Andrew Wiggins has carved out a fine role for himself in Golden State, but I don't see him coming here and being a guy. He's going to have to come back to being a top option if he were to come to Philadelphia. And we saw in Minnesota that necessarily wasn't the case. It wasn't something he thrived well in. So I don't know how I'd feel if that ended up being the final case, unless you're really high on James Wiseman and think he can pan out and be this kind of, future at the center position behind Joel Embiid. But yeah, that's a tough one.
Well, right. Does that give you, you had Dwight Howard here. Now, it's not like you want to say I traded Ben Simmons to find the backup to Joel Embiid, but does that kind of answer a major problem that this team has had for the long term? Hey, he might not be a star or an all-star, but you have a former number 2 pick now getting the minutes behind Joel Embiid.
I could agree to that if Wiseman does pan out. I still think you're taking a chance on a young guy that didn't really impress that much in his first season, and I feel like
it's a tough system for him, though, right?
What?
Golden State's a tough system for a guy like him.
I don't know. If you look at when they were at their peak, they were kind of having a revolving door at center position, and guys were able to give solid minutes. So I don't really know. And even that, if the situation isn't great there, is the situation going to be great in Philadelphia where he has to play behind Joel Embiid, who's the top? He'd have a lot to learn from him, but the way I view it is the Sixers, they have their top guy, and I think Tobias Harris showed that he can be a more than suitable quote-unquote third star. If you're going to move on from Ben Simmons, you need to figure out, you need to find your middleman between the two of those, who's going to complement the two of them and form that formidable big three that's going to help you with, competing against a fully healthy Brooklyn team. Milwaukee locked up their core long-term. They're not going anywhere. So you need to form that formidable big three that's going to help you against these top teams. in the Eastern Conference later down the line.
There's a lot going on as we're speaking right here. You want me to throw some stuff at you?
Sure.
Like live, here we go. The Lakers and Wizards engage on a trade that would send Russell Westbrook to the Lakers. He wants out of Washington. His preferred destination is the Lakers. Russell Westbrook to L.A. What do you think?
That'd be interesting. I think he's kind of the regular season guy that would help them in terms of resting Anthony Davis and LeBron James for the playoffs. But
the answer is, if that happens, Bradley Beal says, "Get me out of here," doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I guess it would depend if he's very high on wanting to play with, I would assume, Kyle Kuzma's going to headline the package in return for Washington. But yeah, I agree. If they trade Russell Westbrook in a kind of blow it up type of trade, that
it would be here. You go. By the way, Kuzma, Harrell, Contavious Caldwell-Pope for Westbrook.
Yeah, Bradley Beal isn't sticking around after that one.
Landry Shamet, by the way, got traded. He is now going to Landry Shamet got traded to, where did I just see that he went? I'll find it. But Shamet is traded. I think he's going to the Lakers, actually.
Really?
What did I do with that? I just saw it. I'll find it here. But looks like there's I guess this is the precursor of what is about to happen here, is that stuff is about to get crazy.
Oh, I think so. Reading the tea leaves and kind of the reports that have been going out, there were a lot of chatter that tonight is going to be very active, that there's going to be a lot of trades, that we could see a quote-unquote
Shamet's going to Phoenix, by the way, for Javon Carter.
Ooh, WVU guy, correct?
That is accurate. A great WVU guy, by the way. But Shamet to Phoenix gives them another shooter.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, if the spacing-wise and he fits their timeline, depending on what you do with Chris Paul, I mean, at the end of the day, you can never have enough shooting in today's NBA. Shamet showed that he can be a rotation guy, so I think that's a good get for Phoenix.
Yeah, that trade. By the way, the Lakers' number 22 pick is said to be in play there as well. There's a little conflictive reporting here between Shams and Woj, which is a nice battle in itself. The Lakers and Wizards discussing a trade that would send Kuzma, Harrell, KCP for Westbrook, and the Lakers' number 22 pick is in play. So that could kick it off, which could really be the precursor for Beal saying, all right, I am out of here. So if that deal goes down, this could be the end of the Ben Simmons era tonight.
You could also look at it in the sense of they're exploring Westbrook trades because they're anticipating a Bradley Beal trade request. So maybe it's, this is the precursor to the precursor of Beal getting ready to leave too. So maybe we do see Washington just blow it all up.
I mean, if you're Bradley Beal, how could you – and I was talking about this earlier, like, okay, whether you like the Sixers process, and I hate that whole story, but Bradley Beal is a 30-point-a-game scorer and lost in the playoffs to a team that has Ben Simmons, who most people listening to our conversation right now think stinks.
Listen, it's the trickiness of – we're in this era of the NBA where guys are constantly switching teams, and now you have guys like Damian Lillard and Bradley Beal who want to be old-fashioned and stick with their teams and try and build contenders there.
Admirable.
And yeah, exactly. But every year it's they need to be the ones that request a trade, and it's the the hashtag free Bradley Beal and free Damian Lillard. So, but I agree. At this point, Washington hasn't really showed they can put anything around him. And listen, maybe he's content with sticking there and he wants to play in one spot for his whole career. But if he wants to make the most of his prime and compete, what better partner than Joel Embiid? The two of those in the pick and roll together would be just unstoppable.
What do you think about this draft class?
I like it. I think it's a pretty deep class. I think even when you go down to looking at guys that the Sixers could potentially pick at 28, there's a lot of rotation guys there. Very high on the guys at the top. I think Jalen Green's a guy I have circled that I feel like hasn't gotten enough chatter and should be, more into that top conversation. If he goes to the right situation, I really could see Jalen Green winning Rookie of the Year next year.
If the Sixers are at 28, I know you've done your homework on this. Are there intriguing guys at that depth, at that deep in the draft?
I think so. I think if you look at a guy like Jared Butler out of Baylor, he's a guy that the Sixers could bring in, is a perfect complement almost across all areas outside of the minor health scare he had leading up to this draft, but has combo guard potential, can put the ball on the floor and create. I think he could share the backcourt with just about any type of guard in the league. He has 3-level scoring potential. He can also be a guy that's coming off screens and knocking down threes. I believe he shot over 40% from deep last year on some pretty decent volume. So, and he also played there for 3 years, so he fits your timeline as well. The Sixers have been a team that haven't really been scared to take some upperclassmen. That worked out with Matisse Thybulle, Isaiah Joe, Paul Reed, also 2 guys who had a little bit of extended college career. So I think if they stick with that pick and Jared Butler is on the board, he's a very enticing prospect for them. Miles McBride out of West Virginia, I think he's another interesting one of just energetic guard, can put the ball on the floor, completely fixed his three-point shot from years 1 to 2, up to his percentage, 10 points. So I think there's some enticing choices there, and not only enticing choices in terms of guys with, young guys with upside, but there could be some guys that they grab there that could potentially fill rotation pieces next season.
Yeah, it's funny because one of the mock drafts I was looking at, they were taking the youngest guy in the draft, Josh Primo, who, you're looking at a guy who's 18 years old and probably not ready to help you at all. That's why I found that to be a little bit of a clunky fit possibly.
Yeah, I mean, or it's just you want to continue to fill the pipeline. Tyrese Maxey was rather young last year, came off his freshman season. But there's a lot of names out there. Josh Primo is another nice name. Sharif Cooper, another young guard that might be a little bit more of a project, but, bodes some nice potential. So although I personally don't feel that the Sixers are going to stay pat at 28, if they do, there are going to be a nice batch of guys that they should be able to pick from that either, bode upside for the future or could potentially be playable guys talking next season.
Yep. It's a very interesting day. It could be the final day it could be the final day Ben Simmons is here in Philadelphia. It could be the end of the Ben Simmons era. They could end up with a massive trade. It could be a very disappointing day. It could be a very disappointing night. I don't know how to feel like the whole Simmons thing. I said, Kevin, I have no problem with them trading Ben Simmons. None at all. But I feel like whatever trade they make is just going to make them different, not better. Unless they got the caveat of Bradley Beal or Dame Lillard, which I don't see happening.
I agree. I see both sides of the argument. I do agree that I feel like it's time for Ben Simmons to move on, but I also feel like if they were to tweak some things in the system and change him up and turn him into a Draymond Green type guy, that he could still be a suitable player here moving forward. But based on the reports, it doesn't really feel like that's kind of in the tea leaves anymore. But the point you make about possibly not being better, just being different, is a real reality and could potentially be a scary one. I mean, say if you settle for a CJ McCollum type deal, yes, you have your perimeter creator, but you're losing defense, you're losing facilitation. You have a very small backcourt with him and Seth Curry. So although I feel like there's a lot of wrong avenues to go down, I trust Daryl Morey in, waiting firm, and he's going to wait for that correct move that's going to move the needle for them, because he's not going to trade a guy like Ben Simmons just to say he did so.
Well, it should be an interesting night. You can listen to the NBA draft right here on 97.3 ESPN. A lot of information there from Kevin McCormick. Follow him tonight on Twitter at KevinMCCNBA, and check out his stuff at 973ESPN.com and Sports Illustrated. And we will, of course, be all watching to see if Ben is in another uniform tonight, and be back here tomorrow to recap it all. All right, Kevin, take care. Enjoy the draft, man.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Gil.